Alright guys, today we're going to talk about 3 players to watch during training camp who could possibly be a bit of a sleeper. Now, all 3 of these players we're going to list in this video are all undrafted Cincinnati Bengals players, meaning that they did not get drafted, obviously. So these guys are kind of even off the bubble radar, it's like the bubble to make the roster. They're kind of off that radar completely. Well, all but one. Our first player we have here is actually a wide receiver, Mac Hippenhammer. Now, Mac Hippenhammer is your typical outside receiver. He played a total of 82.6% on the outside in college. He also returned 9 kickoff returns. So he's a great special teamer, and he's also a really great outside receiver. Now again, he did not play for a huge college. He played for the Miami Redhawks. So him making the roster would be very questionable. But again, his special teams, him being able to play good on special teams, is going to help out a lot. If you look at Charlie Jones, who they drafted in the 4th round, he is known to be a slot receiver. And he is the guy who obviously will eventually take over for Tyler Boyd. That's not what Mac is, though. Mac's an outside receiver. He's like a Jamar Chase, T. Higgins type. So if we look at that kind of perspective, the 3rd outside receiver on this list, if we go back to the depth chart, his name would be in the top 5 players there. So, again, like I said, maybe a special team player, maybe a guy that, gets a practice squad nod, especially because of the fact that he was actually pretty dang good in college. Again, I know he technically didn't play a big college, but he did have 786 yards and then 769 yards his last 2 seasons, accumulating 14 total touchdowns in college. So, biggest knock on him, though, is he is 5'11", which isn't too small, especially when we see some receivers like the Baltimore Ravens. They drafted Zay Flowers, who is 5'8". Marquise Brown is 5'9". Steve Smith-Sinor, at the time when he played, was 5'10". So it's not too crazy to be 5'11", but he's definitely a name to keep an eye out on. And you're going to see a lot of passes thrown to him by Trevor Siemian, but he might be a guy who starts to get some pickup, and maybe he ends up somewhere else in the NFL. But in college, he definitely did a couple great things. Now, here's the second guy, Calvin Taylor Jr. He is actually a running back, and we already know right now with the whole Joe Mixon saga, and on August 14th, he's going to have his trial. Whether he is guilty or not, he is the number 1 running back on this roster, unless the NFL suspends him or the Bengals get rid of him. Number 2 is Chase Brown. But that number 3 spot, it's up in the air. It could be Chris Evans. It could be Travion Williams. Or it could be somebody else. And in all honesty, if Calvin Taylor, another really good player from college here, did go undrafted, again, kind of played at a small school. That's kind of why. But if he can, really pick up in training camp and preseason and show off, it's not impossible for him to get that number 3 roster spot, especially because it's going to cost nothing for the Bengals to have him. Now, here's the biggest problem I have with him personally, is he's a bell cow back. He's not a receiving back. Now, it doesn't really spark too much problems, right? Because obviously, Chase Brown is more of a receiving back, elusive back, while Joe Mixon is a, straight bell cow back. So, he would have to be competing for the job right behind Joe Mixon. It's not impossible for him to obviously not get Joe Mixon's job, but for him to be a backup in that situation, especially because, again, Travion Williams, they love him on special teams. He might not make the roster. Chris Evans, he might not make the roster. It's possible he does, but he might not make it. They might go with 2 bell cow backs and then a receiving back in, obviously, Chase Brown. It all depends on how training camp preseason goes. But definitely expect him to get a lot of carries in training camp. Not with the first team, but a lot with the second team. Third guy I want to talk about here is actually Jackson Kirkland. And I've talked about him before, and I'll talk about him again because this guy is definitely up there making waves. He could have been a first-round pick in the 2022 NFL Draft if it wasn't for the fact that he completely tore his ACL. And now that he went undrafted in this draft because of injuries, if he can stay healthy, get back to 100%, this is going to get scary because he is that depth piece the Bengals have been looking for so freaking long, right? We always said this before. This offensive line this year, my biggest problem with it is the depth. Having depth is the most important thing ever, and Cody Ford is right now a depth. Having him changes the ball game. So his experience, obviously, he's an undrafted player from Washington. He was a 2022 All Pac-12 First Man team and a 2022 team captain. The 6'7" Kirkland had injuries, which viewed him from a top 50 draft course, but he's experienced at guard and tackle. That sort of versatility as a backup makes him the most likely undrafted player to steal the final roster spot and name to watch all summer. Yes, he can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play pretty much everything. So, again, like I said before, it's going to be interesting to see when training camp does run around where all these players rack up. But at this moment in time, like I said before, going over here, Calvin Taylor, who it's possible he makes the roster. Jackson Kirkland here, definitely 100% probably going to make the roster. And then the last guy, he's not on this list here, which kind of does suck. Because I know he is on this list. He's right there, Mac. I don't know why I missed him the first time I looked at this list. Mac right here. So he's right in this kind of range of all these other guys, right? So 3 players, guys. I'm going to be making a lot of videos about training camp when training camp does happen. It is going to be happening at the end of this year. So definitely make sure you stay tuned to the channel for that because it's going to get a little crazy with training camp. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.